Well, greetings, vinyl community. I've been buying records again. So this is where I come to confess my sins. Bless me, Father, for I have spent. That trip. So before I get to the records, I want to give a plug to my buddy Derek Higgins and his new release, collaboration with Brian Day. Really fine piece of electroacoustic music with Brian Day performing on his own personal home-built instruments, and Derek Higgins adding electronics. A wonderful cover there by Derek's relative Gabrielle Higgins. And this is titled Woven Territories. Brian Day and Derek Higgins. Very cool piece of very far out, spacey electronic music. Very cool to hear. Well, electroacoustic, because Brian is doing those personal instruments that really sound like nothing else. So there's that. And one other order of business is just to acknowledge the passing of Sinead O'Connor with this 45 of her single from 1987, Mandinka. I just really love that picture sleeve. I think that's just such a great picture. And image of a remarkable woman. And so rest in peace, Sinead. Yes, I went to the local record store yesterday. I picked up two items. First is this album from 1974, the last original album by Traffic, When the Eagle Flies. I've never owned this album before, not even on CD. This is from 1974, and when it came out to a pretty poor reception. It's generally not considered a very good way for Traffic to go out. And it really is a very, very good album. I did not know how good it was going to be, not having heard the whole thing from front to back. I knew there's a great 11-minute track, Dream Gerard. Very kind of spacey. The whole album is rather dark and moody. But the very spacey piece, Dream Gerard, features Moog synthesizer, features wah-wah saxophone, so these interesting timbral touches. There's mellotron, a lot more electronics in the keyboard department than we usually get with a Traffic album. And the track Graveyard People is another really superb one. So much better album than expected. This is a really nice copy. It's got the inner sleeve with the lyrics and drawings. So that was number one. And number two was a classic album by Chick Corea and Return to Forever, Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy. Very classic fusion album. Everybody is just playing at 120 miles an hour on this. And you don't get a minute's peace. It's just balls out, flying through the notes. And that's what fusion is largely about in the 70s. This album is from 1973, and it features a particular favorite of mine from their repertoire, Captain Senor Mouse. Beautiful Spanish-tinged piece that's done in a much more gentle fashion without the captain in the title, Senor Mouse, by Gary Burton and Chick Corea as a piano and vibes duet. So it's really cool to compare that very drifting, mesmerizing version by those players with this really frantic electronic realization of the same tune. Brand new album by Janelle Monáe comes complete with the parental advisory sticker. This is an album that's very much about sexuality, and specifically queer black sexuality. She dedicates it to the African diaspora, and she talks dirty a little bit on this album, so you get the advisory. It definitely is a very sexual album, and inside the gatefold of this edition, you get an artistic rendering of Titties! Yay, titties. I'm competing with Steve Carlson for the softcore content in this video. And this is the edition on ruby red vinyl. I could have gotten the Orange Crush version. There are assorted colors, I think, out there. It comes with a nice inner sleeve. It comes with an insert. You need all that real estate for the credits, which are extensive. The album itself is a more somewhat low-key but very R&B based album, not as eclectic or experimental as some of her earlier albums. It's definitely an album for sort of making out to, and I think it succeeds because it's a very sexy album. And this might be in vaguely the same bag, because I picked up this album by Grace Jones. When I saw this at my local, I snapped it up because I didn't own any Grace Jones on vinyl, and this is a great one. Warm Leatherette. This is where she's turning away from the more disco style to reggae, with Sly and Robbie holding down the rhythm section and doing these very kind of ominous arrangements of, well, the title track, originally by The Normal, which is, you know, a very dark, imagistic piece of songwriting. She's got her version of Love Is the Drug on here. She's got her own composition. She's got Hunter Gets Captured by the Game, and her own composition, Bullshit. You know what? She kind of talks a little naughty too. So that's why it's in the same bag. Something completely different. I just spoke about the duet album or one of the duet albums by Chick Corea and Gary Burton, Piano and Vibes. This is a duet album for piano and bass by Charlie Haden and Hampton Hawes. And this was recorded in 1976 and not released until after Hampton Hall's death in 1977. The liner notes make it sound like there was only one recording session, but the credits, and it's very extensive. This is a gatefold packaging, and what just fell out of there was this book. It's got a little booklet with credits. It's got a score to one of Charlie Haden's bass solos, and it's got mention that part of the album was recorded in January 1976 and part of it in August of the same year. So it's not just one session. There are two original compositions by Hampton Hawes. There's a beautiful, beautiful free improvisation titled Hello, Goodbye. There's another improvisation that's based on the chords of What Is This Thing Called Love, and an old standard, As Long As There's Music, which is the title of the album, As Long As There's Music by Charlie Haden and Hampton Hawes. And this actually is related to this other album that I showed years ago, The Golden Number, which contains another track from the same recording sessions, the August 1976 session. So there's another duet with Hampton Hawes on this album. This is an album of duets by Charlie Haden with various other participants, Don Cherry, Ornette Coleman, and Archie Shepp, as well as Hampton Hawes. Three records that are kind of in the circle of Henry Cow. One of them is the band Officer, and the album is Ossification. This features a large cast of participants. It's basically the work of Mick Hobbs, but there are a couple of members, former members of Henry Cow. Tim Hodgkinson is on this. Georgie Bourne is on it, as well as a lot of people who are just sort of in the Henry Cow nimbus, of people who have collaborated with the Henry Cow members or been members of the spin-off bands like Bill Gillonis, Catherine Joniot, Zena Parkins, Tom Cora, And this is basically, all three of these albums are kind of post-punk pop. This is a little post-punk, a little chamber music, a little RIO, rock in opposition. Probably, I don't know if it's the most poppy of the three, but it's songs. It's song-based, but it has like a lot of bassoon in it, and it goes from sort of repetitious poppy songs to little chamber music interludes. But also kind of in a very song-based pop music style is Peter Blegvad and Nights Like This. And this is actually, I'm getting more into the pornography aspect of this video. This definitely is a video that comes with a parental advisory. Excuse me. Peter Blegvad, Nights Like This. Peter Blegvad, of course, was part of one-third of Slap Happy and part of the merged band when Henry Cow and Slap Happy joined into one fantastic melange. And this includes some contributions from John Greaves of Henry Cow on bass. It's also got a lot of contribution by Jacko Jaksic on guitar. The songs are very much something that if you enjoy Slap Happy without the Dagmar content, this pretty much fits right in with the Slap Happy vibe. Finally, another of the original rock in opposition bands, along with Henry Cow, Etron Fou Les Loups Blancs from France. And this is their last album, Face aux Éléments Déchaînés, or Faced by Raging Unchained Elements. Fred Frith is another Henry Cow connection, as he plays guitar and violin on 3 tracks on this. This is more frantic and a bit more avant-garde. The band had been a quartet for a while, and on this they're reduced back to a trio of bass, keyboards, and drums doubling on saxophone. They lost the separate saxophone player that they had. Moving on to something very different again, John Mayall, The Blues Alone from 1967. I've actually had my eye out for this particular album. As the title suggests, it's a solo album. There are no blues breakers on here except for drums on about half the tracks by Keith Hartley, and the rest of it is all John Mayall on vocal, harmonica, guitar, bass, jangle piano, 9 and 6 string guitars, organ. I think there's a Celeste on one track. Yes, Celeste, harmonica, Celeste, and bass on the track Harp Man. Nice lower key blues bustin' album from John. It's still the blues after all, and a bit more adjacent to the blues, but also a lot more psychedelic. Steve Miller Band and their second album, Sailor. Another one I've had my eye out a little bit for. This is an original copy from 1968 on that Capitol Rainbow label, and it's actually got a little tearing here because it's one of those records you sometimes see where they put 2 labels on, one on top of the other, and so it's got a little peeling and tearing there on the top label, but there's another clean label underneath. This is the album that has Quicksilver Girl and the song Living in the USA. And in fact, the version of this album that I had back in the day, I got this in 1971 as part of a twofer. And it was a series that Capitol was putting out of twofer albums. There was this, there was a Beach Boys one, but it was packaged with Children of the Future, and they were both in separate covers but shrink-wrapped together. I think one of them was shrink-wrapped inside, then they laid the other one on top and shrink-wrapped them both together and put a sort of purple margin around the cover so that they matched. And they did a similar thing with the Beach Boys. I'm sure there were others that I can't remember. And I'm going to quit here and do an edit because I'm about to run out of time. Okay, some classical music by the French composer Francis Poulenc. The Gloria for soprano solo, a choir, and a large orchestra. This is the premiere recording of that work. The piece was completed in 1960, and this album was released in 1961. Based on the label, this is an early 70s pressing on Angel, but the Gloria is obviously one of Poulenc's religious works. The other side of this album is the concerto for organ with strings and timpani, and that relates to the religious nature of the Gloria in a way because it was composed much earlier in the 1930s, but when Poulenc was in the midst of a religious reawakening, and I think he allowed that to influence him into putting the sound of some churchy organ in this. Gave him that sort of liturgical feel to the solo part in the concerto. There are the performers. We have the conductor, Georges Pret, the soloist, Rosanna Carteri, the choir director, Yvonne Gouvernet, and organist Maurice Duruflé. And this is also on the Angel label, Respighi, The Birds by Otorino Respighi. Great piece of music that is Respighi's arrangements of music from the Baroque era. This was written in 1927, so he was writing his interpretations of music from a couple of hundred years earlier. And the opening track, the prelude after Pasquini, is a very well-known tune that you might recognize if you heard. I remember it being used as the after-concert music when I saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer back in the 70s. And I love this cover. I just think that's a really beautiful cover. And I was specifically going to buy this version of that work for that cover. And the other side of the album is 3 Botticelli pictures. It's just his musical interpretations of the art of Botticelli. Finally, this album was one of my very, very favorite albums when I was a child. There were 2 records that my parents had that I really loved and wanted to hear all the time. One was Harry Belafonte at Carnegie Hall, and the other was the Broadway cast album for Wildcat, which is a Broadway musical featuring Lucille Ball, as you can see. This was her only Broadway vehicle. It was what she did basically after I Love Lucy had ended, and before she started up her next TV series here, The Lucy Show, which sort of morphed into Here's Lucy. To me, they were all the same. Lucy always played Lucy, and so as a kid, I thought this was Lucy. You know, she's playing a character who sort of comes into an oil prospecting town and tries to wheel and deal without having any capital behind her. But I always just thought it was Lucy, and I imagined the other characters who sing as being the characters from the Lucy Show. But it's and it's a very funny album. It's got the witty lyrics that are traditional for a 60s, 50s, 60s Broadway production. The big number that is the best remembered from this is Hey Look Me Over. So I'm not sure how big that was, but it was the closest thing this one came to giving us a standard. Wildcat, Broadway show. All right, that's it. Thanks very much for watching. Be well. Talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.